Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Lageson, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPDChina for news and information. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is president of the Institute for the American Future at usfuture.org, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host of Securing America on Real America's Voice Network.
Thank you, Dee Dee. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China that is aimed at illuminating the myriad ways in which the Chinese Communist Party is at war with our country. Unrestricted warfare, to be sure, people's war since May of 2019, and now quite possibly at the cusp of taking that war kinetic in perhaps the traditional technique of exploding and otherwise blowing things up, but perhaps a further iteration of a technique that is explicitly described in the book authored by two, at the time, senior colonels in the People's Liberation Army, entitled Unrestricted Warfare, in the list of various lines of attack that they would engage in, which we explore week after week after week after week, is biological warfare. And we're going to explore today in some detail what that looks like at the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, not just in terms of their doctrine or their capabilities or their ambitions, but what they have done in practice to this country to date and what they may have in store for us now. We're speaking to you in the immediate aftermath of not one, not two, but three different Chinese nationals having been arrested for trying to smuggle in some sort of biological pathogen or parasite, the purpose of which would be to afflict Americans and or their agricultural sector with quite possibly incalculably profound implications. Socially, psychologically, economically, and from not least a national security perspective, because among other things, food security is national security. We're going to be visiting with, as usual, some stars in the firmament of those who are warning about the Chinese Communist Party. Many of them are members of our Committee on the Present Danger China. All of them are extraordinary resources, and we are extremely proud to be able to present them to you frequently in the course of these programs. We are going to be beginning with a man who has studied China probably as closely as anyone, and longer than the vast majority of us, starting with his insertion, if you will, into communist China back in the early 1970s, as I believe the first Western social scientist to get on the ground there. And in the course of his research, he discovered some of the horrors of the Chinese Communist Party, and he's devoted his life to countering it at every turn. His name is Stephen Mosher. Is the author of a number of books, including The Bully of Asia, and I think one, his title escapes me at the moment, that specifically talks about pandemics and the like, as instruments of Chinese communist warfare. We've asked him for his participation in this program. He was unable to do it in person, but we have, I'm very pleased to say, a video from Stephen Mosher, the topic of which I think is the Chinese Communist Party's historic contempt for human lives, those of their own people, as well as, if you can imagine, even less regard for ours. And the CCP's relentless pursuit of novel ways to destroy such people. Let's go to the videotape now.
Well, I'm happy to join you today, Frank, and to talk about the fact that China is continuing its bioweapons research into dangerous pathogens that can kill Americans and, of course, kill off other things like America's food supply. And in this context, I recall 2 years ago when we discovered a secret Chinese bioweapons laboratory just a few miles north of where I grew up, near Fresno, California. And the Biden administration did everything possible to try and cover up the fact that the Chinese Communist Party was running a secret bioweapons laboratory right under our noses in California. The FBI refused to investigate. The CDC came in, and instead of investigating the pathogens and finding out exactly what their genome looked like, whether or not they had been engineered, how deadly, how transmissible they were, they simply destroyed all the samples. So this was a classic cover-up on the part of the Biden administration, which covered up a very important fact that we all know from the COVID debacle, that bioweapons are at least as dangerous as chemical weapons, or at least as dangerous as nuclear weapons in terms of the number of human beings that they could potentially kill. And I believe that after we discovered that secret bioweapons laboratory in the United States, and who knows, there may be others, the Chinese government decided to operate in a slightly different way. Why go to the trouble of setting up a secret bioweapons laboratory in the United States if you can simply implant bioweapons researchers from China in American labs that are already set up, that are already funded, already doing dangerous gain-of-function research? And you can simply bring in secretly, as these Chinese scientists have been credibly accused of doing now on 3 occasions, bring in credibly these dangerous pathogens and work on them under our very noses in the laboratories that we ourselves are paying for in our major research universities. And how easy it would be, after bringing in these dangerous pathogens, for one to leak out of the laboratory. And I say leak in quotes, because it might be a deliberate act. In fact, I suspect that the release of the COVID virus was quite deliberate from the Wuhan laboratory. As you know, Frank, I wrote a book about that debacle. Certainly the spread of the virus around the world was quite deliberate on the part of the Chinese Communist Party. But how much more deadly and infectious would a pathogen be if it were released not in China and then spread slowly around the world and here, but released in the heartland of the United States itself, or released upon our crops, as one recent pathogen that was brought in would have devastated our crops. So these are the concerns that I have. And the only solution to this problem, as far as I can see, is to shut out Chinese researchers, China researchers, regardless of what their claimed background is, because their background may be fabricated, from our laboratories altogether. If we want to let Chinese students come here at all, and I quite frankly don't, but apparently we are under the new trade agreement with the Chinese Communist Party that is been negotiated and may be approved by Xi Jinping, China's dictator, and President Donald Trump. Under this new agreement, presumably, we will allow Chinese students to continue to study at our universities. But let's let them study political science or philosophy or theology or sociology. Let's keep them out of the engineering departments. Let's keep them out of the science departments, the genomics departments, the biology departments, because we now have a history, a pattern of Chinese scientists, starting way back several years ago with the head of the Wuhan laboratory, the infamous Dr. Shizhang Li, who studied at the University of North Carolina under Ralph Baric in his lab there, funded by Dr. Anthony Fauci. And that's where Dr. Shizhang Li learned her gain-of-function research that enabled her to go back to China, to her Wuhan lab, working with the China's bioweapons program and develop COVID-19. So let's keep China's scientists out of our laboratories, out of our research departments, keep them in the humanities, keep them studying history, but don't let them steal our intellectual property. And above all, don't let them in our own labs create dangerous pathogens that might one day be used to kill millions of Americans.
Thank you for such an incredibly concise and impactful intervention. I just want to say we will, I'm sure, be talking a bit more about this bio lab discovered in Reedley, California, and the efforts the Biden administration indeed did go to try to cover it up. I would mention just in passing that the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party of the House of Representatives has concluded that there are almost certainly more such labs inside our country. But to Steve's point, they are certainly, prospectively at least, being augmented by our own research labs in the hands of Chinese nationals sent here for the purposes of waging biological warfare against us, quite possibly. I also wanted to just mention that Shizhang Li, the researcher from China that Steve mentioned, is better known as the Bat Lady for the work that she has done in using bats to advance the biological warfare program of the Chinese Communist Party. Our friend Sean Lin may have more to say on that in a moment. But before we get to him, we're going to have another of our faithful contributors to these programs, Charles Sam Faddis, a former career Central Intelligence Agency undercover operative, contribute also by video, a sort of overview as particularly seen through the eyes of not only a career intelligence officer, but a man whose job in his last duty station before retirement at Langley, the CIA headquarters, was to try to address and mitigate the threat of weapons of mass destruction terrorism. So Sam, who is these days the proprietor of a wonderful online resource and magazine, you can find it at andmagazine.substack.com, and also an author of numerous books, fiction and nonfiction, including Beyond Repair, The Decline and Fall of the Central Intelligence Agency. We've asked him to address the question of the CCP's unrestricted biological warfare and how what he and I agree are kind of like what was once said about neutron bombs. Biological weapons are capable of killing all the people, but saving all the buildings. And whether that is in fact consistent with both the Chinese doctrine, its ambitions, and its strategy towards this country in particular. Let's go to the video with Sam Faddis.
One of the things that strikes me when we start talking about the CCP, biological weapons, pathogens, this whole ball of wax, is that like a lot of things, it's always being discussed as if it is a potential threat, as if it's a threat that may emerge at some point in the future. So no matter, even folks that are purporting to talk about this very seriously are always discussing it in some sort of abstract, theoretical sense. This is something that could be really bad down the road at some unspecified date if we don't do something. And as with many other threats that I would submit we're facing today, that's really all wrong. This is not an abstract thing at all, and it's not a potential thing, and it's not something that we're facing one of these days. We're facing this now. I mean, we are already at war with the Chinese communists in many respects, even if it doesn't look like a conventional war in the sense we define it. It's already happening, and when we look at the realm of biological warfare, biological agents, this kind of thing, I mean, this is about as real and as concrete as you can get. I mean, first of all, let's think of the backdrop here. There's no question about what the Chinese communist attitude is toward biological weapons. The whole concept of law of war in the Western sense, Geneva Convention, and all that stuff, they have explicitly rejected that a long time ago. They said straight up, these are a bunch of rules that were made by Western powers because they are superior to us in conventional military capabilities, and therefore they're trying to say we have to fight them in a particular way because they know they'll win. So forget it. We're not doing that. We're going to do whatever it takes, completely unrestricted warfare, whatever it takes, no rules, everything's fair game. Okay, so we know that, and we know that they've explicitly said that about biological agents. We know that they have talked about biological agents and biological warfare being what they call the commanding heights in regard to military conflict. So this is how you're going to win. This is the decisive thing you're going to do. We know that they've even had concrete, specific conversation, there are multiple examples actually, about the concept of using biological weapons that would be targeted to particular ethnicities. This is basically the biological warfare as the equivalent of a neutron bomb. So you kill off the population, a specific population, you leave untouched the land, the infrastructure, everything. And then the Chinese can move in because the biological agent was not targeted genetically to attack East Asians. Okay, so this is bedrock. So there's no question that they're really serious about this, and that they're not just having hazy theoretical conversations, they're working this. Okay, then we have the concrete examples. I'll cite only 3, but there are many, of how they're actually doing this. I mean, first of all, COVID. Now, we can argue about whether COVID was deliberately released or jumped the fence because the Chinese lab practices are horrific. But there's no question that it came out of a lab in Wuhan and that it was genetically engineered. It was a product of gain-of-function research for the specific purpose of more effectively killing people. And it got loose one way or the other, either deliberate action or negligence. And it did a pretty effective job of tearing the heck out of American society, politics, and the economy. And basically you talk about something that's a bad case of the flu, so it gets a lot worse from here. Right? A couple of years ago now, we found this lab sitting near one of our key fighter bases in California, completely off-the-books lab run by Chinese, filled with all kinds of really dangerous organisms. One entire freezer that, although I think it was empty, was marked Ebola. So we could presume, as a matter of common sense, that they marked it as Ebola because at one point it was full of Ebola. We did basically nothing, by the way, to run that down. So why that thing was there, what its purpose was, and I don't know, where the heck is all the Ebola that was in that freezer? Nobody ever bothered to figure that out. We didn't run that down at all. We don't have any idea how many more such labs there are. Now we're confronting this business with the University of Michigan, where we've had now a total of at least 3 Chinese researchers, and by that I mean Chinese nationals, caught involved in bringing biological organisms into the United States in violation of all sorts of laws, and deliberately hiding them, smuggling them into the country to take them into a lab where they were all studying, in air quotes, and where they would work on these organisms. Okay, so smuggling them in. And by the way, all the indications are that not only were they deliberately smuggling them in other words, they knew the rules, they were deliberately smuggling them, but that they had done this multiple times before. So it's not just one time. It's been ongoing for, well, we don't know how long. As a kicker, the lab at the University of Michigan is run by 2 more Chinese nationals. I'm not talking just broadly ethnic Chinese. I'm talking Chinese citizens running a lab at the University of Maryland where we got other Chinese citizens conducting off the books, basically illegal research on dangerous organisms. And funding, a major piece of the funding for this lab comes from U.S. government agencies. So if you're keeping track at home, that's U.S. citizens paying Chinese citizens to play with dangerous organisms and make them more dangerous on our soil. I should add, the third Chinese citizen that was arrested very recently was apparently bringing in a particular species of roundworm, and the press has kind of downplayed that. Like, who cares about roundworms or flatworms, whichever they were. The point is, those worms are used to, you use those to test techniques on. In other words, the point is you're figuring out how to do things and modify things potentially in human beings, and all you're doing is using the worms as test subjects for these techniques. So this is not some obsession with worms. It is a much, much bigger picture. So we have a huge problem. Again, like with the lab in California where we never figured out how many there are, we have no clue how many of these people are smuggling things into the country right now, how many of them have been here for years, or putting any idea of what the totality is, the full scope of the organisms they're working with. So obviously we need to engage really, really rapidly here. Start by locking down this lab at the University of Michigan, shuttering the place, inventorying everything, and getting a complete handle on what the heck is going on here. And then we need to start expelling people from there. And then we need to do the same thing with every other significant biological lab in the United States. Not one of these days. We need to do this right now, because we have no idea the full scope of the biological attack that may already be ongoing. Back to my original point, this is not a theoretical thing. This is not a one of these days thing. This is a right now, the attack is already ongoing and kind of thing, and you better respond before you wake up one day and find that we are facing something one heck of a lot worse than COVID on our soil.
Thank you. Bracing report, as always. And one that I did want to just correct a point. I believe that the Reedley Biolab did indeed have a freezer with the word Ebola in Mandarin on the exterior of it. But far from empty, as I recall, it was full of aluminum foil and plastic wrapped packages. And when the Biden administration, in its fashion, finally allowed the CDC to inspect this facility, they opted, I'm told, not to examine the contents of those because they did not have any indication on the exterior of them that they were, in fact, Ebola packages. So, to Sam's point, the administration simply had guys in shirt sleeves come in and cart the stuff off to some incinerator and burn it all up. A very odd story indeed, and possibly even more alarming if either of the two things that we've discussed, one, there are more of them, or two, that in the aftermath of its discovery, as Steve Mosher has indicated, they've simply started using our labs for this purpose. We're going to hear more about what the Chinese Communist Party's laboratories are up to, and the extent to which their mission is deeply problematic, as well as the innovations and operations that it has spawned. From Sean Lin. Dr. Lin is a PhD, the co-founder of the CCP Biothreats Initiative, a senior advisor for the World Organization to investigate the persecution of Falun Gong, an assistant professor of biomedicine science at Fei Tan College in Middletown, and a survivor of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He was also an Army specialist in all of these topics that worked for a time, I believe, at Fort Detrick, the Army's central repository for such work. We're very pleased to have Dr. Lin, a member of our Committee on the Present Danger China, here to shed light on the hard science piece of all of this and what it might mean for all of us. Sean, over to you, sir.
I want to have a quick follow-up about what was Stephen just said about the California lab. Actually, I think one important fact I want to point out is that the guy who ran these secret biolab is actually a convicted felony. Actually, he was convicted in Canada, and then he changed his identity and sneaked into the United States. And then he ran these labs. He purchased so many different equipment and samples through another kind of bankrupted biotechnology company, and then he further imported some of the dangerous pathogens actually through some of the CDC channels. So I think it's a huge problem of these loophole in security protocols for the CDC to manage these dangerous pathogens. That's the first thing. And then second, I want to talk about overall for People Liberation Army, they have a special commission. It's called Science and Technology Commission. And this commission is definitely significantly enhanced under Xi Jinping's leadership. And so right now, several generals with biotechnology backgrounds actually is leading this institute. And also a general with a strong background in artificial intelligence are driving this commission as well. So under Xi Jinping's overall military civil fusion, China has tremendously pushed forward the integration of innovations from academia into PLA entities as well. And many universities actually had a strong partnership with PLA. And so it's not a surprise nowadays Chinese scholars, researchers who are doing critical biotechnology works can come to the United States, maybe with some collaboration with PLA, some projects collaborated with PLA, or even PLA inform them that you need to be prepared to carry out the task that the PLA or the CCP asks them to do if they landed in the United States. So I don't think that's a small operation right now. It's probably a big strategy right now. And so the recent case in Michigan, so for example, the two scientists who sneaking the fusariums, fungi into the United States. So these fusariums are dangerous because they will produce two toxins. One is DON toxin, which is, you can also call it vomitoxin. So it can cause serious GI problems. And then another one is actually a phytoestrogen. And so that can feminize males. So if these toxins are entered into food supply chains, it can cause severe health problems. And also it will cause head blight problems, disease for the crops. So it will cause significant production drops for crops. So you damage the agricultural industry as well. So definitely this is a dangerous pathogen. And these two Chinese scientists, the female one is called Jian Yingqing, and she works in the University of Michigan. his boyfriend actually was caught in the airport, and he was sent back to China. So both of them work at the Zhejiang University, and Zhejiang University has a strong collaboration with PLA under military civil fusion programs. And both of them know very clearly that the University of Michigan, the lab they work in, they didn't even have the permit to work on these fusarium dangerous fungi, and they communicate before they landed in the United States about how to sneak in these dangerous organisms. And even on the mobile phones that Jian Yuqing has, the FBI later on found out that she actually had a letter showing her pledge to the CCP. So she's definitely a Communist Party member, and even probably a small branch like a secretary's level. So there's a problem, definitely a strong connection with PLA's CCP's mission here. And then the third Chinese researcher, Han Chengxian, so she's it was involved in sneaking a roundworm, and this roundworm, from the information the FBI released, I see it's probably C. elegans. So these organism is very often used in many of the genetic studies, cell biology, molecular biology, as well as for toxicity studies. So if you want to study some toxins, quite often C. elegans was used for this kind of research, and because they have some sensory organs in C. elegans, and so it could be involving in some toxin study as well. So it also is very weird that the professor Shang Xu, that Han Chengxian worked in University of Michigan, he would definitely know it's not appropriate. It's actually illegal to smuggling these organisms into the United States. And how could he let these Chinese nationals bring in this dangerous pathogen? So I think the FBI definitely need to investigate this professor. And I completely agree with Stephen Mosher's approach to really did a thorough investigation in the lab. What did they involved in terms of their relation with Chinese researchers? You know, the professor, she also went back to China to give different seminars regarding about his researches. So did he have any collaboration with PLA inside China? You know, this definitely need to be further investigated. And so these are the two dangerous organisms that these three researchers try to bring in. And actually the fusariums fungi, actually from the confiscated materials, we can see the petri dish, actually there's a mark on it. It was ARP9, which is an actin related gene. So manipulation of these genes may be involved in involving into the functions of the chromatin remodeling, as well as the transcription process. So we don't know what kind of mutation that these organisms already have that these two researchers want to bring into University of Michigan. So anyway, this is a modified dangerous pathogen that these researchers want to bring into the United States. So definitely it's a huge alert for national security. I think fortunately FBI can caught them in the customs, but these shows a very dangerous trend that these scientists become so aggressively, they knowing all the dangers, they are knowing they are violating these regulations to bring in this dangerous pathogen. And this clearly reminded me the case in Canada. One of the microbiologists, Qiu Xiangguo, she also against all the regulations, shipping dangerous Nipah virus samples to Wuhan Institute of Virology. And she was actually later on was investigated in Canada. So this is another dangerous pathogen. You know, that definitely PLA is very, very interested in Nipah virus, and they actually very actively collecting Nipah virus in Southeast Asia as well. And so how could a top-notch microbiologist in Canada, in National Microbiology Lab in Winnipeg, why she risk whole her career to ship dangerous Nipah virus sample to Wuhan? It definitely means someone from higher echelon of the CCP or in the PLA give her these kind of instructions. That's why she risked her whole career to do that. Similar for the researchers in University of Michigan, they know the risk they are taking. Why do they do this? It's not just a convenience for their research. I think there are some instructions behind it. So I think that's why we need to be very, very cautious or highly alert regarding CCP's heightened pace on this biological warfare against the United States. And so especially right now when Chinese Communist Party is in a very fragile situation, Xi Jinping may be losing his power in China. So the PLA may try many things, seems to be very extreme, but it's actually in their doctrine book for a long time. They will find different way to attack United States. So I think this is a very, very alarming situation.
For so many different dimensions of this very alarming situation. We'll come back in Q&A, I think, to drill down on a couple of topics that you've touched on there. But before, two more presentations. Dr. Karen Sigeman, the president of the American Freedom Alliance, member of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, the individuals who I think is doing an outsized job educating the rest of us about the challenges to freedom we face from the CCP and other quarters, as she has complemented her early career in anti-submarine warfare technology development for the United States Navy against the then Soviet threat. She is now addressing, among other things, education as a national security threat vector and issue. Notably, what we've just been hearing about, what Chinese nationals have been doing in our universities, are they, in fact, in some cases at least, ticking time bombs? And we'll talk a bit about, I'm sure, the possibility that now their continued presence in our college campuses is assured. But first, let's take stock with Karen Sigeman about the nature of this particular threat vector and how it, too, fits into the strategy of unrestricted warfare against America. Dr. Sigeman, welcome.
Thank you so much. And yes, it absolutely is a threat vector. Universities have always been the source of where totalitarianism, various kinds of revolution have been fomented, either in one's own country or another, and we're seeing exactly that. As you had mentioned, I worked in under-submarine warfare during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, and thinking about that time, how the Soviet Union looked at universities was quite different. Yes, they used it as a recruitment source from the KGB, but they were very cautious about sending students here. Why? Because our universities at that time and our nation at that time was completely different. We were much prouder of and courageous about how we were a freedom-loving country, a freedom-loving people. The Soviet Union was very restrictive on who it sent. We had maybe 50 at any given time. As it got closer to the fall of the Soviet Union, 200 plus students here. They did not want their students here. The Chinese Communist Party has an entirely different perspective on this. We are a different country. They learned from the prior Cold War, and whether or not this is a Cold War versus more kinetic, obviously is a topic of conversation. They learned what not to do with the Soviet Union, and we completely forgot every lesson we ever had. We've been letting them in from China, from the Chinese Communist Party, to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of students, even though they have, as we keep saying, declared war on us to various degrees of lethality. We seem to see them, or up until President Trump came in, as a non-issue, a non-threat. Meanwhile, we have these hundreds of thousands of Chinese students here. We've got billions of dollars coming in. We've got all kinds of influence activity going on. But a big part of this is, as has been noted, the collaboration with our universities. It's not just that we have students coming here, attending our colleges and learning great things and then going back to their homes and sharing the wealth of knowledge. To the contrary, there is massive theft, there is massive influence, and most importantly, again, there are these kinds of collaborations, of which we just saw with the University of Michigan, and again, collaboration in quotes. So many of our universities have ties to Chinese universities that are military related. So this is not just, a lovely cultural exchange. Won't this be great? This is an absolutely 100% deliberate effort to not only undermine our universities, but to undermine us as a nation. Just a few examples. MIT, there's many students. There's Chinese students, and all of these are connected to the Chinese Communist Party. MIT, what is it they're after? AI, of course, quantum computing, many areas of defense. There's recruitment going on, and there are partnerships. Harvard, hotbed of biotech research and policy, where they can influence policy. There are research partnerships with Harvard. Yale, we've got biomedical. If that doesn't put all kinds of fear in you, it ought to. Also, they're influencing centers for Chinese studies, right? This is everything to do with China is wonderful. And again, this is against the backdrop of how the United States is evil and China is good and wonderful. Stanford, obviously, connection to Silicon Valley. So they're doing all kinds of research partnerships, getting connected with them, infiltration, sabotage, AI also, and of course, aerospace. UC Berkeley, back in the day, much more connected to nuclear research, also genomic research, which again, utterly terrifying. And again, none of these, even University of Michigan isn't even on the top list of where they've been putting some of their biggest efforts, but we're seeing some of their more pernicious efforts happen there. UC San Diego, neuroscience, biotech, Texas A&M. So they are in all major areas of our research that we are on the forefront of. They are sending students here. Oh, isn't this lovely, lovely students? We're doing partnerships. This is all deeply embedded in their offensive war against the United States. They are obstructing our research. They are doing intellectual property theft. And you mentioned, Frank, ticking time bombs. That is absolutely right. Every single one of these is a major potential threat, or as Sam Faddis said, don't just consider it potential. They are on their way to all of these. And as we saw with the University of Michigan, whatever we see, whatever we catch them with, the Reedley lab, we know that there are dozens, if not hundreds, similar people trying to bring equally lethal toxins into our country that have various scale and scope of danger that they can do to us. We know it's a much bigger effort and deliberate offensive effort that they are waging against us. As during the Cold War, we understood the threat. We understood that they were fighting against us. We positioned ourselves in opposition. It's far past time that we recognize the threat that they are posing, and all these various threat vectors, as you say, Frank, stand up to it. President Trump has done Herculean efforts to try to keep these students out. Our others in our government are undertaking just as much effort to keep them in, which is one of the more horrifying aspects of this war, to find that we have the enemies within to such an incredible degree as we do now. But President Trump does understand the threat that this poses, is doing what he can to deny the visas, to throw any of these students, and again, to what extent are they actually students, out, but I think we've got to make much more of a concerted effort to deny visas to anybody coming in from a nation that has declared war on us, including the students. Most WTO or not, if you've declared war on this country, we need to start treating you with much more vigor and protecting our country against the efforts that they are making much more strongly. So I don't understand exactly at what point we're going to get to where the nation recognizes that they have been waging war against us, and it's time for us to stand up in the way that we did during the Cold War against the Soviet Union, which we then won.
Well, that's the perfect segue to our final presenter and topics that we will be discussing pursuant to this idea that at what point does what the Chinese Communist Party is up to become palpably a mortal threat to our country and, well, a casus belli, as the Romans would say, a cause of justification for war. To address that topic, I'm very pleased to say we have back with us the chairman of our Committee on the Present Danger of China, Brian T. Kennedy, a man who has distinguished himself in, well, I guess one might say para-academic circles at the Claremont Institute by Claremont McKenna University. He's also been active in his present role as the president of the American Strategy Group. His insights into sort of the strategic character of what we're talking about here, some of it at the tactical or molecular level even, I guess one might say, but at the big picture level is a very important additional feature of the conversation that we wanted to have with you all today. So we've asked President Kennedy, I call him, address the question of if the CCP's smuggling of deadly pathogens into America is not an act of war, what would be?
This is a very interesting conversation we're having, and it follows on a conversation we've had earlier in the week where we were internally on the committee debating whether this was an act of war by the CCP. And in my judgment, it certainly is. Sean did a brilliant job sort of laying out the technical aspects of what transpired here. But let me make a few points and then really summarize, what the FBI found in that with these two researchers. First of all, human beings, we do a lot of things. We study things. We are going to university. We run businesses. We raise families. We, go to church. We have this multitude of things we're engaged in, and we tend not to focus on things that are, warlike. It's up to the government to figure out what is warlike. And in our republic, to when something is an act of war against us, to act appropriately. We hear about these Chinese researchers here, and we think they bring in this pathogen. And we think, well, it's just that can't be that serious, right? The FBI arrested them, but if it was really serious, someone in Washington would treat this like an act of war. And what you realize is we don't do that. We don't have people in Washington, with the exception of now of President Trump, and I would really say only a handful of people around him and outside the government who see the seriousness of all this. So we're engaged in these high-level negotiations with the PRC over trade and commerce. During those negotiations, which have been ongoing the last several months, the Chinese Communist Party, as a matter of high government policy, allows the PLA to send over two researchers with an aggro-terrorism weapon to get these into the country. at a time where we, the United States, are saying we're going to be diligent about how we treat our border. Indeed, we're shutting down our border. We're not letting new illegal immigrants in. We're going to take our border seriously because this is our country. During that window of us shutting down the border and sensitive negotiations, the Chinese Communist Party, and I don't believe, a lot of people say Xi Jinping is on the outs and he's doesn't control the military or he doesn't control the intelligence community and he's sick and all these things. These are people who are masters of deception. Believe none of that. You cannot know whether any of that is true. And even if it were true, it doesn't matter because it's communist China and its military and its intelligence operations operating against the United States. During these sensitive negotiations, they send these two researchers, quote unquote, into the United States with these pathogens. They're doing what by doing so? They're testing the system. Are we really controlling our borders? Are we really going to take seriously foreign researchers coming into the country and what they might have with them? And so as a matter of high government policy, as Sean was alluding to, the CCP was testing the system, engaged in an act of war against us to see whether or not we would catch them or not. Now, let me read, just to get a full picture of it, what the FBI said in the indictment. This is the press release that the FBI put out. It said they arrested Jian in connection with allegations related to Jian and Liu's smuggling into America a fungus called Fusarium graminearum, which scientific literature classifies as potential agroterrorism weapon. This noxious fungus causes, quote, head blight, a disease of wheat, barley, maize, and rice, and is responsible for billions of dollars in economic losses worldwide each year. Fusarium graminearum toxins cause vomiting, liver damage, and reproductive defects in humans and livestock. Reproductive defects in humans and livestock. Okay, they bring that into the United States. They get arrested. That's great. Good on the Border Patrol and good on the FBI for doing that. But when you take a step back, where are the hearings in Washington that are examining this as an act of war? Where is the State Department saying something? Where is the Defense Department? There are 100,000, as we know, Chinese nationals who came over the border in the last 4 years during the Biden administration, look to be military-age males, as we've said on these webinars, who came here, it would appear, to engage in military activity. Did they have this kind of a fungus? What did they bring with them? If these scientists are willing to bring these to the United States as a test, what might, during the 4 years where no one was really watching, what could those people have brought with them? What are their plans? And I simply, you know, in a way to conclude some of this, we're in a period now in this country where you're going to have war in the streets. You see it in Los Angeles. You're going to see it this weekend in America's big cities. We're going to be examining who should be a citizen or who is a citizen and what to do about those people here who are not citizens. There's going to be a lot of internal strife during the next 3 years, 3.5 years left of the Trump administration as we try to get these people out of the country. Will Communist China see this as an opportunity to exploit our internal strife, which they promoted and they added to, in order to engage in a more kinetic form of war against us by using an agro-terrorism weapon like this to harm the United States, to weaken the United States, and to, in effect, put us on our heels at a time where we have an America First president who means to rebuild the country and to take seriously again our national defense. I personally believe, not speaking for the committee whatsoever, that they have committed an act of war against the United States. I'm going to encourage myself, members of Congress and of the Senate, to treat this as such, to take seriously the idea that when the Chinese send this kind of a weapon, they're going from just a people's war where with COVID-19, they tried to manipulate the United States, but something that might not kill all of us, to an actual war that means to debilitate us. Because when you start destroying the crops of the United States and the livestock of the United States and the reproductive capacity of Americans, you're trying to not merely kill individual Americans, but you're trying to destroy American civilization. You mean at that point to starve us, and you mean at that point to conquer us. And either we treat this as an act of war, or we suffer the consequences. Thank you, Frank. Thank you for organizing this, and I look forward to our conversation afterwards.
Thank you for pulling together a lot of strands here that need to be tied up for the public, our audience today, the many thousands that we hope will be watching this program in the days to come, and not least that larger audience that you've just spoken of, the United States Congress, in whom the founders vested the authority to declare war in defense of our nation. Your admonition that an act of war has been perpetrated, a declaration of war has been formally announced on the pages of the People's Daily back in, as I mentioned earlier, May of 2019. And this undeclared war that we focus on in these programs has been going on for decades. It does seem to all of us, I think, at the committee, high time that the cumulative effect of all that is brought to the fore in our country to determine the appropriate response. And I think this conversation has been extremely helpful in doing just that. Let's do a quick round of questions. Sean Lin, I believe you are familiar with a secret speech that was reportedly given by the then defense secretary, defense minister, I guess they call him, of the Chinese Communist Party, a general by the name of Chi Hao-chen. I know I'm not pronouncing his name properly, but that's there we go, a reasonably close facsimile. He talked specifically in the course of that speech to, I think, party cadre, not meant for our situational awareness or knowledge even, but about the mission that was given to the People's Liberation Army by its specifically its biological warfare program, which is, by the way, illegal, folks. The CCP is a party, Chinese government, to a biological warfare treaty that prohibits offensive biological research and production and weapon stockpiling and so on. But Sean, what do you recall what the mission was that Deng Xiaoping gave the PLA's biological warfare program and how it bears on everything we're talking about here?
Science Minister Chi Hao-tian, almost 10 years ago, I forgot exact year, almost 10 years ago, he already gave the mission to the PLA, emphasizing this is strategic command height that the PLA need to take in terms of the biotechnology, other related innovations. So in the unrestricted warfare doctrine has already been formally adapted by PLA, because originally it was only proposed by 2 senior colonels in the PLA, but now it's formal doctrine. And also, not just Chi Hao-tian, and actually 華府智庫, one of the vice president in Central Military Committee's Science and Technology Commission. He also is a lieutenant general. He also still almost I think it's 2017. He also highlighted that the PLA need to advance academic innovation tightly together with military innovations, and also in terms of biological technology, they highlighted several important fields, including genomic bioinformatics, genetic editing, as well as synthetic biology. And so many of the important fields, they also actually use it in the field of making novel microorganisms. And so this is also clearly mentioned in their strategic plans. And so now I think China has actually advanced significantly in this field. And also, in the last 20 years, basically through the collaboration with American academic institutes, they already have their scientists well trained, and many of them went back to China and to build up their own infrastructure, their research network, and even with military civil fusion program. Now, many universities, you never probably imagine that they can have biological program. They can set it up. Like for one example, Beijing College of Chemical Engineering actually set up a biological related program, and the researchers there actually created a dangerous pathogen mutation of the bad coronavirus, and that actually can cause 100% deaths when they inject it into a humanized mice model. So you never imagine. But that program's mission statement clearly stated that they will conduct any researches in the highly risk area. It's very clearly stated. They can take the risk. They don't care about the bioethics issue. They just clearly stated they will do it. And then recently in Jilin Agriculture University, there's one researcher. His name is sorry, for a moment his name come back. So one of the professor, he actually have a dual identity. He's also a PLA military officer, and he conducted a gain of function study and on the avian flu virus. So he put the dangerous H5N6 hemagglutinin protein and neuraminidase genes onto the backbone of H9N2, so making a new avian flu variants that can spread faster and then also cause, still also belong to high pathogenicities. So these actually are military officer working in a civilian university doing these dangerous gain of function studies. So they are very aggressive on many fronts, and the United States helped train many of the scientists in China to do molecular biology. And so I think the problem in the United States that even national defense strategy, we don't have a clear understanding on the biowarfare that the CCP is waging against the United States. If you look at the past several versions of the national defense strategy, only a few paragraphs regarding about biowarfare. And so I think the current Trump administration definitely need to significantly elevate the understanding, preparation, and countermeasures on this biowarfare. Right now, the Congress only have one National Security Commission on emerging biotechnology led by Senator Todd Young, but that's not enough. I think the overall national defense strategy need to be highly improved.
The answer to that I was actually looking for, what you've said is very, very relevant and important, but I believe that it was 20 years ago that Xi Jinping made this secret speech, roughly. And one of the things he said at the time was that the then General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, commissioned the People's Liberation Army's biological warfare program to depopulate the United States so that it could be colonized by China. And I think if we put everything that we've talked about in the course of the program to this point into that context, it not only sharpens the point Byron Kennedy has made about the nature of this as an act of war, but also the magnitude of the peril that it poses. And I wanted to turn, Karen, to you. One of the things that I think everybody has sort of, put into a context, as Sam said, of a kind of a hypothetical, but just your thoughts as a person who has spent time in the educational business at every level, I think, really. The prospect here that these students, the three that have been apprehended, but the hundreds of thousands of Chinese students in this country, selected by the by the Chinese Communist Party, perhaps the PLA as well, to come to America to study, are studying, as we've been talking about, hard sciences. What would you say is the likelihood, whether they're in research labs or whether they're simply in school more generally, or whether perhaps, I don't know, they're doing field trips to Chinese-owned farmland in this country, of which there is said to be something like 100,000 acres, I believe, that one or more of those people might well be ordered by the PLA to actually disseminate such funguses or parasites or what have you for the purposes of wreaking havoc in America's agricultural system. I'm asking for an informed assessment of this rather than precise knowledge, because I don't think anybody has it. But what's your working assumption, ma'am?
Well, that they've declared a people's war on us, given the speech, the secret speech that you cite from 20 years ago, given what they have learned about us, given what we've already seen as to their waging war of various kinds, unrestricted, and I will include the Wuhan virus, I would say that put all that together, and the odds of one of those people taking some active engagement against us in a highly lethal way, I would say it's 100%. I would venture to say that most, if not all, are recruited, prepared to, under some kind of requirement, to play some kind of role against us. The touring farmland, yes. Being a vector, him or herself. We've seen how this happens with totalitarian regimes, to transport something, to be a virus vector oneself isn't an unheard of strategy. So the fact that they are here in the hundreds of thousands, the fact that they are, yes, they are stealing information, yes, they are collaborating, but they themselves, their very person, you're saying, is that also a threat? I would say 100%. A few 100,000, and as Brian pointed out, yes, we're closing the border, and yet they're still here. So to what extent are we being serious about closing the border? To what extent are we serious about addressing threats that have come in across our border, either prior or currently? While President Trump is very serious, because I do think he recognizes exactly the threat that you're talking about, we don't know the form that any of this can take, but we do know that they are 100% committed to committing something against us, as they have been doing, and we don't seem to be committed at all to the same extent in standing up to it.
So this that I touched on in my comments at the opening is it's hard to overstate what the damage could be to this country, whether it's the confidence in our food supply and what that would translate into the willingness of people to consume its products or perish by not doing so. The economic costs, of course, of product line that we, rely upon to balance the trade in this country's relations with other nations, for example. Just the societal and psychological impacts of those things are as I think rightly said, incalculably serious. So if we don't get cracking on this, we face truly calamitous possible options. Finally, do you appreciate you bringing this up, because we are speaking, as we record this program, on the eve of the No Kings events scheduled to take place around this country. Word about, we know about the people bringing us this initiative and the groups that are participating in it, and the extent to which this too may prove to be a very concerted attack on our country by people working with or for outfits like the United Front Work Department of the Chinese Communist Party, and how this could, in a sense, be a virus inside America, not a literal, one, but very much a subversive force. If indeed it proves out not to be, just one very bad day of thousands, if not a larger number of events of this kind, but a ongoing effort to really subvert the United States from within.
Yes, Frank. No, this No Kings protest this weekend will certainly be an effort to divide the United States, to tear us apart, to see whether they can provoke any kind of confrontations with the police. And where there's, like in Southern California, where I live and where Karen lives, the National Guard or the Marines that have been sent here to protect certain federal structures, including the ICE agencies. Anna Paulina Luna this morning on Steve Bannon's War Room, our colleague, talked about this guy Singham, who is an agent of the CCP and pouring a great deal of money into the No Kings effort. And she wants the Congress to investigate it. They're calling to subpoena him, and if he doesn't show up, to arrest him if he enters the United States. Or I don't know if they can extradite him, but regardless, to highlight the fact that this is foreign money going into these operations here in this country with the sole purpose
or an NCCP tied, as you say.
Yes, no, he's a clear. This is CCP money going into the United States to create this. I will. We're not only a week and a half away from, or from Tiananmen Square in 1989. Mm-hmm. There was the case of mass unrest that was put down violently. The irony or coincidence, you mentioned Shi Haoxin, and Shi Haoxin was the one who gave the speech on the bioweapons and how the CCP could use bioweapons to destroy the United States, and that was very serious. It was also, I'm not sure you remember this, Frank, but it was also Shi Haoxin who was in charge at the time in 1989 of putting down the uprising in Tiananmen Square.
I did not know that.
He was responsible for that. Yeah. He was head of he was part of the general staff, but specifically assigned to put that down the way he did. And he was rewarded for that. Putting down the demonstration as violently as he did and as demonstratively as he did was a thing for which he was promoted.
Yeah. Good career
so
move.
The Chinese like this idea of putting down and suppressing anybody who puts their head up on behalf of freedom.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that Shi Haoxin was also involved in that. This agroterrorism business is something I think, we have to take seriously given the weakness we're in right now. We have a strong president, and that's a good thing. And he's still in the building, in the part of his plan to rebuild the country. And so he needs to be supported. I was a little irritated, I will say, at first when I heard about all these Chinese students coming back to the country. But I think at their high point, there was like 400,000, 420,000 in the United States. And they yielded around $40 billion in revenue to the United States. So I can see where the president might have thought, well, this is just money. They're coming here for an education. They want to pay for it. That's fine. It's also the case that almost all of these, students coming are the children of the members of the Chinese Communist Party, which is interesting. So they send their kids to the United States. Xi Jinping's own daughter, I believe, lives in somewhere in the Northeast. You read about the armed guards around her all the time. But it's interesting, I think, from the president's point of view, that we might have 200, 300, 400,000 children of the Chinese Communist Party in the United States. And I'm sure the president made a calculation, a commonsensical calculation, as it were, that the Chinese might be less inclined to attack the United States if their children are here going to school, right? Not that we have, we'll have 300,000 hostages in the United States, but the Chinese may be less inclined to go kinetic against us in a way if their children are going to school here. And the president will also think it's up to us to make sure they don't steal our intellectual property, which they have stolen over the last, at least decade, more certainly, at a pace of around $500 to $600 billion a year from the United States. Well, I think the president would think that's on us. It's our job to make sure they don't steal our intellectual property. And so we, the United States, are going to have to do a much better job at counterintelligence than we have been. And if there are 300,000 Chinese students, the children of the Chinese Communist Party, here on American soil, well, that'll be something we have to live with in the short run. But again, that's transactional. They're going to pay money, and they're going to be here, living here in the United States. Let me close, though, Frank, with this simple idea that the FBI charge against these two researchers was of an agro-terrorism nature. They called this fungus a potential agro-terrorism weapon. Well, let's take that one step further. Is the CCP now engaged in terrorism, actual terrorism against the United States? If so, it's up to this administration to declare them a terrorist state. If they're going to engage in agro-terrorism, key word there is terrorism. And again, we're trying to find sensible ways of thinking about all these things. I would offer in how we get serious about this to listen to our own words. Our own country says they're engaged in agro-terrorism against us. Mm-hmm. These people have invaded the country. They look to be of military age, these 100,000 Chinese nationals. They're not operating in good faith right now, the Chinese Communist Party. They never do.
Yes.
And we know that. President Trump knows that. We need to develop and help President Trump develop policies that will actually reflect the seriousness that we ourselves say and believe about what it is they're doing to us. And so this this webinar has been one of a series of over 100 now that try to highlight the seriousness of all this. And I don't think it could come at a more important time, Frank.
Quibble, but who's counting? I think we're over 210 actually all in. Another calibration point, and it's very helpful, Brian. I did not know that General Chihao Chen, however you pronounce it, was one of the perpetrators of the Tiananmen Square. Another was that fellow that I mentioned, Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Deng Xiaoping himself. So we're up against people who are murderous, for sure, against, again, their own people. And in fact, our friend Dee Laugesen and I pulled together elements of the first 70 or so of our webinars in this book, The Indictment, prosecuting the Chinese Communist Party and friends against for crimes against America, China, and the world. And the reason I mention it, Brian, is we talked in the book about the Chinese Communist Party being a transnational criminal organization, which is another way of designating it, and bringing law enforcement capabilities, among other things, to bear against this enemy, whether it's on terrorism charges or whether it's on, the murder of 1.1 million of us with their biological warfare the first time around, or for other crimes. I'm good with any of it, but I do believe that this is the moment when we must awaken the American people to the very real and very mortal nature of the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against us. And as I said in my commentary, I think at the beginning, this is not necessarily an explosive kind of kinetic warfare, but it has definitely, with the advent of biological weaponry and techniques in various kinds being introduced against us, a very much kinetic sense in the larger meaning of that term. And it brings me to just a concluding thought. Brian, you spoke very powerfully about what President Trump is trying to do to rebuild our country. And this is particularly, going to be in sharp contrast to the efforts that we will be seeing this weekend and probably in the months to come to destroy it at the hands of people working for the Chinese Communist Party, or working with their United Front Work Department, or their donors, or their allies at the moment in the Shurist supremacist camp or the globalist camp. Donald Trump was stopped cold in the midst of his earlier efforts to rebuild this country by biological warfare unleashed against us, as Dr. Sean Lin has particularly been very clear about. This is a criminal organization. This is a terrorist organization. This is a mortal enemy under the misrule of the Chinese Communist Party, and it must be dealt with as such. The hour is very late, ladies and gentlemen. We are hearing elsewhere that there is now a North Korean biological warfare operation underway, one in which a mutation has been engineered to the avian flu to make it highly contagious and deadly among animals. And this could well be part of a whole new COVID-19 style attack inside this country. This one, again, with an agricultural dimension, an agro-terrorism, if you would, dimension. So we call on everyone listening to this program, listening to it live as we're speaking to you now, or listening to it in some future time, to become part of the solution. There are lots of ways in which you can help. One that I'm particularly fond of pointing out, and we'll close with this, is that mention is made in this program and in many of the others, and properly so, about the threat posed to us by these Chinese nationals, some of which, yes, are students, many of them, some of which are researchers or businessmen or just spies, so-called diplomats, but some of which are now apparently in huge numbers. I've heard everything from 10,000 to 150,000 People's Liberation Army soldiers inside our country. And I've said it before, and I'll just be quick in making this point again. When a United Healthcare associate executive was murdered on the streets of New York a few months ago, the perpetrator of that crime was not found and apprehended and put on trial, thanks to all of the surveillance cameras in New York City or all of the law enforcement agencies and other assets that the governments of every level were bringing to bear to find this individual. It was a guy flipping burgers in an Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's who connected the dots between the wanted poster that he saw somewhere and the guy who was eating a burger in his restaurant. That, ladies and gentlemen, is a prime example of what we need to engage now, which is the public as part of the solution here. They must be made aware of the dangers that we're facing. That's what we're all about, but it has to come from others, including, I believe, the President of the United States. And they need to be engaged, enlisted, not as vigilantes taking matters into their own hands, but to help us identify, locate, and facilitate the authorities' removal from our country of those soldiers and such other Chinese nationals as are, in fact, posing a peril to us. So please become part of this solution. Follow the work we do at the Committee on the Present Danger China at presentdangerchina.org, and Didi will give you more information about what else you can do. The other side of my final thanks and my prayerful hope that God will bless us on this 14th of June and in the days, years to come. And God bless you. Thank you. Didi, over to you.
Thank you. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day or so of the program's conclusion. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. For webinar notices, updates, and news, subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPDChina. Join us again for next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today. Stay safe. If you see something, say something. Goodbye.